Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Humanity Matters show. And we are having our special Humanity Matters one-on-one. Today, we have Dr. Peg Falls-Corbitt with us. And as always, if you are interested in learning more, please find my website, philipfletcher.org. That is philipfletcher.org. Also, we are broadcasting live on YouTube. And so if you just go into the search bar over at youtube.com, put in Humanity Matters, you'll see my handsome face, and you can subscribe and see a lot of great content, lectures and talks and educational material. If you are a podcaster and love to listen to podcasts as you are walking, you know, spring is hit, people are going to be taking walks, or maybe you like to exercise to it, or just have something going in the background when you're at home, please jump over to anchor.fm, where you can find the Humanity Matters podcast. And we have podcasts releasing at least once per week. And go over there, subscribe, give a review. Got a lot of great interviews and talks going on there as well. So if you're missing anything that happens here on Sundays, you can catch that as well on the Humanity Matters podcast. Hey, sponsorships help. If you want to sponsor this show, please visit PayPal, pfletcher73@gmail.com, pfletcher73@gmail.com, and the mailbag. If you want to participate in the mailbag and get something cool, I'll choose your question. Send me an email at humanitymatterspodcast@gmail.com. That is humanitymatterspodcast@gmail.com. And so, today, we're going to be talking about criminal justice, death penalty, punishment, justice, in relationship to human flourishing. The United States incarcerates a whole lot of people, all right, a whole lot of people. A study came out from Pew Research, was September 2020, U.S. Department of Justice stated at the end of 2018, a total of 30 states and the Federal Bureau of Prisons held 2,628 persons under the sentence of death. The states of California, Florida, Texas held about half of those persons. Here in the state of Arkansas, where we are broadcasting from, where I live and where Dr. Corbitt teaches at Hendrix College, the state of Arkansas, as of December 31st, 2018, according to the Bureau Study Statistics, the state of Arkansas has 31 persons under the penalty of death. The means of execution that can be used here in the state of Arkansas include lethal injection and electrocution. What does it mean for a society which practices the death penalty? What impact does this have on individuals? And more specifically, what about the family members of victims? And what about the family members of those persons who are under the sentence of death and, you know, in the case of Arkansas, have received lethal injection or electrocution? What is the impact on them as well? How can we understand justice and human flourishing in a world that may one day end this practice? You know, we all hope for a better world. And so for your consideration, I want to share with you a quote by Alexander Solzhenitsyn. If only there were evil people somewhere insidiously committing evil deeds, and it were necessary only to separate them from the rest of us and destroy them. But the line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being. And who is willing to destroy a piece of his own heart? And that's from Alexander Solzhenitsyn, from his book, The Gulag Archipelago. And so today we have with us Peg Falls-Corbitt. Hello, Dr. Peg.
Hey, Phil. Hey, Dr. Fletcher.
How are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing good. Doing good. So Dr. Corbitt is the Virginia A. McCormick Pittman Distinguished Professor of Philosophy at Hendrix College here in good old Conway, Arkansas, where she has taught since 1987. Dr. Corbitt graduated Phi Beta Kappa from the Rhodes College and holds her MA and PhD in philosophy from Vanderbilt University. Her articles on the ethics of punishment include Against the Death Penalty, A Christian Stance in a Secular World, in the Christian Century. Another one, Retribution, Reciprocity, and Respect for Persons in Law and Philosophy, and Prisons and Privacy, A Moral Evaluation, in the journal Freedom, Equality, and Social Change. In April 2017, as Arkansas was preparing to execute 8 people within 11 days, Falls-Corbitt's letter entitled, and I quote, "Not Justice," appeared in the Arkansas Times. Falls-Corbitt is an ordained elder in the Presbyterian Church USA, and she and her husband, Doug Corbitt, also a philosopher, have 2 adult daughters. Dr. Corbitt, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Phil.
Hey, so tell us a little bit about, I know I just read through your bio and all that, but what's not covered in the bio? Just tell us about yourself, hobbies, things you like to do. Tell us about your family, something unique about them.
Well, I guess one thing that's not in the bio is that I grew up in Arkansas. I grew up in Wynne, Arkansas, in the Delta, and very appreciative of the family, the extended family and friends and church family that raised me there. And that I taught in Iowa and Indiana before coming back to Hendrix. And I met my husband in Indiana. We were teaching at St. Mary's College there, and the position at Hendrix came open. It's a chance to return home and teach at a place that I had admired. My husband, Doug, was willing to come, and we came. And in Conway, I think our activities have been trying to be good members and good teachers at each of our institutions. He's at UCA at the Honors College, and I'm here. Working through our church, First Presbyterian, and various activities and that we try to do good in Conway through some nonprofits and so on. So our hobbies are hiking national parks. That's our main.
Okay. Good deal. Yeah, some good hiking. I'm sure it's about to happen. We've got some beautiful weather here in Arkansas. So it'd be great to hit those trails. So can you offer us a working definition of punishment as it relates to our legal system and just how this developed over the centuries?
Sure. So I think the most general definition of punishment, it would be that it's what we do to wrongdoers to hold them accountable for the wrong they do. And in the case of the legal system, of course, the we there is the state. It is not meaning Arkansas versus Alabama, but the legal institutions that reinforce our laws. And the wrongdoers are those folks who break the laws. And I'm mostly focused on people who break what I consider the laws at the core of the moral aspect of our system. So rape, assault, murder, burglary, and those kinds of things. And punishment, the other thing I would add about punishment is that it's always coercive, and it always involves the infliction of some kind of suffering circumstances that we think people will take that they don't want, right? So somebody might want to end up in jail, but we don't punish them because they want to. We punish them because they're wrong. As far as the historical, I don't think the definition of punishment is what has changed all that much. I think that our understanding of what means we can use to punish justly have changed, and possibly our deepening understanding of what questions we need to ask when we ask about the ethics of punishment. And the ethics of punishment for me are the two questions. What justifies punishment at all, especially since it is a coercive infliction of suffering of some kind. And you can't just go around doing that. So you've got to have a just cause. And given that justification, what kinds or degrees of punishment are justified? So.
Okay. So what ideas have contributed to an ethics of punishment? Religiously, politically, what ideas have contributed to our understanding of, like you said, the means in which we distribute punishment?
Yeah. So I think that in ethics, we think of sort of two broad groups: the consequentialists, the folks who are thinking that what justifies an act is the consequences, and the non-consequentialists, folks that look at that there's something other about the very nature of our actions that justify something. And so on the first camp, the consequentialist group, the punishment is generally justified. One is through that it deters, that what justifies punishment is that it has a deterrence effect. And in that deterrence effect, you can concentrate on two kinds of deterrence we think it has. And one, if we keep that person from committing further crimes, then we've deterred that person as far as their future behavior goes. Obviously, we failed to deter them if they did a wrong. But we hope that when we punish one group, it deters another group from having any incentive to act. So deterrence is a major theory for justifying punishment. Some people want to look at rehabilitation. That what justifies punishment is that people have done a wrong and they clearly have identified themselves as folks who need to be rehabilitated, and we do that. In the non-consequentialist camp, the main one there is retribution, and the idea of something about a person doing a wrong justifies or causing what we call undue suffering, justifies our inflicting some kind of suffering upon them. And then I think today we would add restorative justice, which I'm not sure that that theory is as much something that justifies punishment as tells us what would it be best for us to do once punishment is justified. Although I know restorative justice people don't like the word punishment, so you can talk about that if you want. But my work has been on taking the theory of retributive justice, which many people call eye for eye, tooth for tooth, life for and standing there, but being against the death penalty.
Yes, and we are going to get there. So offer us an evaluation of the death penalty and how it's been used in the United States, just from your standpoint as a moral philosopher. Offer us your evaluation of that, of how it's been implemented, its impact. Just share with us that.
Yeah, so my approach as an ethicist is to think about the death penalty as a kind of punishment. Obviously, a punishment ends in death, and to ask what could justify it, and what justifies it has to be some theory that justifies punishment in the first place. So what justifies punishment, and then looking to see whether the death penalty can be justified as achieving the aims that justify punishment in the first place. So let me first use sort of the two that I don't use, but they give an easier illustration. Let's say that we said that the purpose of punishment that justifies this coercion in another person's life is deterrence. And then it would really matter. I mean, if that's what justifies punishment, then it's on us to prove that the death penalty deters. Right? And the evidence is that the death penalty does not deter murder any better than life imprisonment or less severe punishments. And so if one is a strong deterrence and you think that's it, that's what we're doing when we punish, then the death penalty isn't justified. If you think rehabilitation is the purpose of punishment, then it's pretty clear, I think, that the death penalty is not justified because it doesn't rehabilitate but end the person's life. And so the hard one is really, well, what about retributive justice? What about this notion of eye for eye, tooth for tooth, life for life? When I look at that, well, first, just to note a couple of things. Even though we're willing to do life for life, we have to acknowledge that there are limits to what we're willing to do, even if we're retributivist. I mean, I just don't know a contemporary retributist who thinks that we should torture torturers or rape
Mhm.
rapist. And
Okay.
so that simple in-kind thing we pull back from. And the question is, why do we pull back from it? And to answer that question, I also want to point out that we have to, if we're going to be retributivist, we have to do more than just utter a sentence. Well, surely it's eye for eye, life for life, and we have to explain why. The philosopher H.L.A. Hart has said, by what strange moral alchemy does suffering respond to suffering?
Suffering. Yeah.
Make good, right? And so when I look at that question, I appeal to the fundamental moral principle that's most important to me as an ethicist altogether. And that is, I'm stealing from a philosopher named Immanuel Kant, but you have to respect persons as ends in themselves. You have to respect persons as inherently worthy being, as a particular kind of special being, capable of choosing and evaluating their acts in accordance with right or wrong, even when we do that badly. And that is actually why I prefer the retributivist theory. I think it's the one ethical explanation that says desert matters. Retributivist says you can't punish unless they've done it, that somewhere people have to deserve that punishment. Why do people deserve punishment at all? Before we even get to the death penalty, why do people deserve punishment at all? And the answer in that for me is that persons, you and I and all human beings for me, are exactly the kind of being who can be a moral agent, right? Make decisions and claim they're good or bad, even when we get our judgment wrong. And when you're dealing with that kind of being, you're dealing with the very kind of being that can be held morally accountable. So for me to respect you, for example, Phil, is to acknowledge that you're the kind of person that is accountable for his actions.
Right.
And you do that in a lot of ways, but when it comes to wrongdoing, I'm respecting you as a person. Let's say you did do something bad to me, right? And if I just didn't do anything about it, in a way, I've treated you like the squirrel in my yard that I don't know how to correct. No, person. And so when I say, no, you ought not to do this, this cannot be done, I will not tolerate it, that is a way of respecting you as a person. So in my view, justified punishment in a state is our mechanism for telling folks, no, this cannot be done, and that we need a way to communicate how bad it is that they do that. And so that's where the severity and the proportionality principle comes in, is that if we just treated all wrongdoings alike, punish them exactly the same, we wouldn't be communicating as a society that there is a difference between murder, even murder and rape and assault and burglary and driving on the wrong side of the car, right?
If I can ask, when you're speaking about, because we arrive at this point because one individual has done something allegedly to another individual, and then the judicial process occurs, and then that individual is found to be guilty. Obviously, that person has the right to appeal, so on and so forth. But one thing that's always interested me is that since it's an action of one person against another person, why do we hear it's the state versus Philip Fletcher instead of said victim, that victim's name versus this person?
Great question. First, I want to take one other step in what I was saying about punishment is holding people accountable, because to me it means that therefore in punishing people, we must ask for a response from them as a moral agent. We've got to treat them as one who can respond, and we must use punishments that they can respond to.
Yeah.
And then we can go. I'm going to go back to your other question first, but I think raping rapists, torturing torturers, and killing killers are punishments that are designed for the person not to be able to respond as a moral agent, and that's what makes them wrong. Now, to go, and we can come back to that if you want, but to go to your question, is that really punishment historically, ethically, and I want to say correctly, is not seen as something, one person against another. That is, the state's system of punishment does not exist to carry out my will for the person who harms me. Let's imagine that I'm really sick of somebody driving up into my yard at night and leaving tracks, and I'm so angry at them that what I want, I mean, I'm using a ridiculous case to just show that it's not carrying out my will, right? There's the government, the state. The state on our behalf. We have laws for how much a person can be penalized, charged, or whatever for driving into my yard. It doesn't matter how much anger I have at that person. Then we cannot turn the state into an arm of an individual's degree of vengeance. And so what the state does, or what we see ethically, is that the purpose of punishment is to protect the whole. That punishment is a way that we all of us as citizens carry a kind of burden and benefit of law. There might be to some a burden of obeying, and the benefit is that we can expect people to obey insofar as the state acts on our behalf. So that's actually a very important part of the nature of punishment, is that it's not that we can just charge the state to do to a wrongdoer what the individual wronged wants the state to do. It is done on all our behalf. And the problem with death penalty is that people are killed on my behalf and on your behalf and on everybody's behalf. That is, we have all decided in Arkansas through a representative government that the death penalty is an acceptable way to punish people generally, no matter what we feel about it. I can talk more about how I care about the victims and what I think they're going through relative to my being opposed to death penalty if you want to, or we can go back to...
we're gonna get there. We are, because I think just in my readings, that's brought up is what about the victims' families, but then also I think about as well, what about the person who's put to death and their families as well? There's multiple parties that are involved in this, and I think one of the things that we can forget is even the person that's on death row and is put to death, he or she has someone that loves them as well, even have to still reconcile the act that they committed, but they still have to deal with loss as well. And the suffering that's going all the way around. No one is obviously exempt of that. So in your 2017 article that you published about not justice, what motivated you to not just write that? You could have just written that for an academic reason, but you chose to have that published in the Arkansas Times. Can you talk to us about that and what you wanted that to accomplish?
Well, I think the rapidness with which Arkansas was prepared to carry out the death sentence pointed to many, many problems with the death penalty, and one is just the importance of appeals to make sure that we are in fact killing people that even by our own laws, though I disagree with them, deserve death. And what I saw in the conversation was that that most people were using retributivism, right? This notion that murderers deserve death in order to defend the death penalty, and wrapping into that some claim about justice for the victim. And my position, of course, is that while retributivism is the right way to justify punishment, that there is a limit to the kind of proportionality or how you can express the proportionality of suffering that we return. And that's limited by the fact that we cannot turn people into things rather than having a punishment system that asks them to respond to punishment as a rational agent.
Can I say something to that quickly? So,
can I say one other thing first?
Oh, yeah.
The other thing is, and those people who are saying life for life may just not identify with this form of retributivism, But retributivism really is a theory of punishment that cares about proportional punishment.
Mm-hmm.
And so we know that there are people who have received the death penalty, had it carried out, and we later find out that they didn't do it. We know that we are exonerating people on death row and discovering. So we know they're innocent people on death row. And the problem with death is, one of the problems with death is you can't compensate once you've taken a law. And so, to me, a just theory of punishment never, especially one that cares about proportionality, never allows a kind of punishment for which there is no compensation when you get it wrong, when you accuse the wrong person. And death is uniquely that punishment for which there can be no compensation. And so it's unjust on that basis as well. And then there are, of course, other things about the way in which we carry it out in our own system, where those people of color and poor, don't get similar treatment in our court system, and that I think also makes the death penalty questionable, because we're handing out something that's, even if all the kinds of different punishments, they're different let's say racism or poverty affects a judgment upon that person.
Mm-hmm.
The death penalty, again, is a unique way in which there can be no making up.
Right.
That discrimination and that bad judgment.
That's true. Yeah, you had mentioned really a depersonalization. You mentioned things, and in the paper that you wrote on retribution, reciprocity, and respect, and how in there you had referenced, I believe it was an officer within the prison system who said even just incarceration itself, I'm making up a word here, it thingifies the incarcerated, because somebody's always in their life, and they're always subject to the whims, decisions of somebody else. And I thought that was a powerful reference. And then on the other side, looking at the death penalty, how I think for some, to support of the death penalty is because you've moved from seeing that individual as a person to just someone who, you strap them up and electrocute them, or give them a lethal injection. And it's easier to deal with that if you don't look at that individual, that human being, that as I hold to, that person made in the image and likeness of God, as a human being. And it makes it easier for us to swallow what happens to that individual.
I think that's exactly right. And probably behind a lot of what I see is what's bad, not good, what's terrible, what's unjust in our incarceration system ties to how quickly we move from this person did a wrong to this person is then only that wrongful act, or we put them in a box where they become just a thing, maybe a monster even, right? And we stop treating them as a person. We don't see their sacred worth. So this notion that I have, and that I'm using from Kant, about respect for persons as persons, as a Christian, what I love about it is that it does express that notion of each individual having sacred worth, and our obligation to always respond to them in a way that acknowledges that worth.
That's right.
And that's what I want in our system, and that's why I'm against the death penalty.
I hear you. Hey, this is Dr. Philip Fletcher with Dr. Peg Falls-Corbitt, and we are talking about the death penalty and retributive justice. And we're going to talk more about that, and we will be back after this commercial break. Stay tuned.
Imagine you have it all.
A warm bed and a full fridge.
No want, no worries, and no fear of tomorrow. Then disaster strikes. Your world is turned upside down.
You are now broke, hungry, trying to survive.
This is a story of people like me.
Like me. Like me.
Like me.
Like me.
And people like you.
Now picture this, a community of compassion, a place of second chances. You can give a home to the homeless here in Conway, Arkansas. Learn how at www.hopevillagecoho.org. Thank you for making hope happen.
All righty. Hey, welcome back to the Humanity Matters show. Got Humanity Matters one-on-one with Dr. Peg Falls-Corbitt, and we are talking about the death penalty and retributive justice. If you have a question or a comment, hey, put it up. We would love to take that in our upcoming minutes. So, Dr. Corbitt, let's talk about the families. Speak to that in your understanding of the families. Yes, ma'am. Okay. In regard to retributive justice.
Yeah. Yeah. So first, I think that we should, it's incumbent upon us, right, as caring people, to think about what a victim of horrible wrongdoing is suffering, and to appreciate the emotions that they have, and to know just how much they don't want this to ever have happened to them, how much anger they're going to have at the person who has done this, who's taken their loved one's life, resentment, desire to see that person suffer, that comes out of a pain that they have. Right? And we do need to find ways to acknowledge that pain and to care for them. But as I said earlier, what we can't do, I think, is do something for that pain that is in fact a morally wrong thing for us to do as a people and as a state. And as I said, I think the death penalty is morally wrong, and so that's just not something we can give the victim. It's not, it's not justice for them because it's not a just act. And I was going to add something about that in a second. But in fact, I think that when we study things, and I can't point, I'm not going to give you the reference for it, but often families think that what they need to heal is that the person die, the person who stole their loved one's life to die. But what we find is it's not healing.
Yeah.
It doesn't bring, because the only thing that could, that can heal is handling the fact that person's gone from their life. I think one of the strongest emotion beneath that revenge, that anger, all those emotions is just this loud cry from the heart. This should never have happened. Please, so that this has never happened. That's what they want, understandably, but it's not what we can give them. And so I think that groups that work with victims are the best way to go, that they need our care, they need our help, they need our attention. They may need to be in conversation with the murderer, right? That programs that ask a murderer to stare the family's victims in the face, not in the courtroom. Sorry, I'm going to have a train back here. Not in the courtroom.
There's no
problem.
That's quite all right.
Yeah, that can bring more healing, possibly. Again, when we were, and that fits into my model of respecting the murderer as a person. He or she is more than just the murderer, and we want to appeal to the murderer's moral capacity to apologize, to be sorry, to regret, and to commit himself to or herself to a better life. And I do think that facing up to the anger of the victim quite personally, rather than just, the death penalty behind a curtain, is very likely to achieve the just cause of punishment and help the victim more than what we do now. I don't know. What do you think on that?
Yeah, it's. I mean, I've thought it's by God's grace, I've never had to experience, the loss of a loved one, well, in my family, through violence. Personally, I've been in war, and it's a whole different framework. But in a case of in a civil society, there is that cathartic response of I want something done, and I want justice. I think that wells up. I think that's a natural human response, that we do want this wrong righted, right? But I think it's also the recognition. There are some ways that a wrong can be righted. It's still not going to bring that person back. It's just not going to bring that person back. So part of it is the discussion is, what is it that you are truly looking for in the midst of your grief, and suffering and loss and anger and disbelief of, having your normalcy just shaken to its foundations. But then also you mentioned to the offender, that individual is a moral agent as well. He or she has agency, and they chose to do that act for a reason. And I think that helps with the why on the end of the victim's family, because that's one of the questions that's asked, whether you're religious or not. There is that of why did this happen? Why did this happen to my loved one? And I think that would be tough to sit in front of that individual, however long it took for him or her to express that why. But then in order for that person to express that why, that requires some deep introspection as to why he or she committed that. And, to look in the mirror and say, because in the case of murdering somebody, you have depersonalized them, him or her. You have moved to a point where you no longer see them as you and him, or the offender and the victim having a commonality of being human. They've moved to another place that then they act. And so it's diving deep into how that process occurred, and why you chose to do that. And are people willing to sit through that, and do that very, very, very hard work? But I was reading, thinking about that quote from Solzhenitsyn, like that line of good and evil runs through all of us. So it's only by God's grace or something where that could be me, and that's one of the other things I think about. Whatever the circumstances were, that could have been me. I could be that offender. I could be the one who is sitting on death row, and why am I not? And the hope is that would buffer a little bit that anger, especially that anger side of just wanting, I think, not just justice, but almost vengeance in some cases. So I can't imagine what those families go through, especially those that have, continued to sit on death row because of appeals, because there's no closure still, right? There's still no closure. That person is still living, still eating, still existing, still learning, whereas my loved one is not anymore. And so there's no closure on the victim's end, but then there's no closure on the offender's end, as well as the offender's family's end as well. So again, this is not just well, in the immediacy, it was something that happened between two individuals, or individuals done something to multiple people in some cases. But it extends out. That one act extends out and impacts so many people, and so that suffering echoes. The reverberations of that are just something.
I was just reading something. I think it was from the website on. Let me think about it for a second. What is it? I guess it's capitalpunishment.com. I'm not going to think about it, but okay. But the fact. So we have, as long as we have the death penalty, we must allow opportunity and time for the appeals. That's a part of the justice. We have to guarantee that we are not a person who is innocent, did not do it, or is innocent according to our laws. That is, the laws were wrongly applied. We must do that. And so the long time it takes for those appeals is often very, very hard on the family. And it does make it harder to find some closure. Not so much they discover because the person is alive, because once the person's dead, they discover, oh, that's not closure either.
Right.
But they don't get to the point where they can discover that because they're waiting, and they think it's going to solve.
Yeah.
And it doesn't. So I do think that life imprisonment without parole will have some benefits for victims' families that doesn't get talked about when it just becomes a slogan, justice for the victim.
Yeah.
And I appreciate all of us having good and bad in us. I do think sometimes we should ask, but for the grace of God, there go I. And if I were that person on death row, and my deep in my soul, I know I am better than this, and I can be better than this, and I can see this is awful now, and then I'm going to die. How do we feel?
Yeah.
You're saying so.
Yeah. So offer us a vision of justice for the future. I mean, if you look at history, and you spoke about this in the beginning, the means used in regards to the death penalty have changed. I mean, you look at history, there's some brutal ways in which people were put to death, either by fire or drawing quarters or, beheadings, so on and so forth. Now we're at a stage where it's, lethal injections and electrocutions. So we are progressing. And what does the future hold in this regard? What does the future look like in a society without the death penalty, and still maintaining the dignity of all the individuals involved?
So for one, you asked me what's my vision of a just system of punishment, and then you named particular ways in which we do bring about the death penalty. Of course, since I'm against the death penalty, none of those are better than the other. And I would like to say that there are lots of complicating factors in using medicine to purposefully kill on behalf of the state. So there are ethical issues there in lethal injection. And there also are all kinds of issues about the way in which we're not sure that we're not causing torture of a kind when we use those drugs. I'm not up on all those details, but it's incumbent upon us to ask about that and to know what is it that we are doing that is cruel and unusual or torturous when we kill persons, if we are going to have the death penalty. It's interesting in itself that it matters to us how we kill a person, even if we think they deserve to die. I mean, it speaks to our humanity that it matters, but I just think there's something cosmically significant, maybe theologically significant, that it is hard to kill a person humanely. It ought to be, right? And maybe we should listen to that and say, you know what, we're not supposed to be about this business. And so when you ask, more generally, so if I say, life life imprisonment without parole. There might be some issues that later I want to think about in never giving anybody a chance for parole, but it seems to be a more just move than the death penalty to me. And of course, then if you're just thinking about incarceration in general, there is so much we need to do to improve what we do when we incarcerate people, because it is a system in which we often throw them as garbage. To go back to that thing language, that object lesson,
Right.
as if we can put them in some jail and we never have to look at them and we don't have to care about their circumstances, and we presume there's a lot of violence, and so we don't care how much violence they suffer while they're there. That's really not respecting those persons as inherently worthy and sacred beings and people who are more than the crime that they're being punished for. We can punish them for the crime. It has to remain in some way proportionate to the suffering caused, meaningfully proportionate, but it should not be filled with arbitrary subjection to violence or to rape while they're there, to harm, or just be under the thumb or power of guards. That's a problem that we have. So I don't have a solution to how we get there. I do think we need to humanize folks who are incarcerated. I think we need to realize that many people, the route by which people become incarcerated is not just they sat back one day and an evil spirit thought they would do something bad, right? So what you were talking about, let's think about what brings people to the point where they do something that we think deserves incarceration. And let's try to speak to that in our society. So I don't think there's any sudden rendering of good things in incarceration without looking at the society that that uses incarceration as much and as often as we do, and where I think we'll find that incarceration falls particularly heavily among the poor and those who have been disenfranchised in many ways from the goods of society.
Yes, that's good. Yeah, I tend to think, and one of the things I've been thinking through is, especially at the disproportionate nature that it impacts disenfranchised persons, and then from a class perspective, persons who are low middle income and low income, and even down to the homeless, is the types of laws that are passed. Obviously, at a state legislature level, and then in some cases federal level. I think those need to be examined as well. And how can I tend to say, increase the gap between those who enforce the law and everyday citizens? Just from my experience, especially working with.
Phil, did you say decrease the gap?
No, I want to increase the gap, right? Between law enforcement and everyday citizens. Because once you get into that cycle, that criminal justice cycle, right? With fines and court appearances, and then I got to make a decision whether or not am I going to leave my hourly job, and if I don't leave, then a warrant is going to come out for my arrest, and but I still need to work. And there's just some laws I think that are on the books that increase the probability that I'm going to run into someone who is in law enforcement and then I end up in a county jail, a city jail, a county jail, or at worst. And so I think that needs to be looked at as well. We got to hold our elected officials accountable.
There's some studies being done just from what's being called the school to jail pipeline, and the way in which a no tolerance about bullies. I mean, once you classify a kid as needing that avenue of the courts, unfortunate things come into their lives, and so it's not. I understand what you mean about wanting to separate. I think the reason why I question it is, I think in some ways, helping people understand, anybody, law enforcement, politicians, everyday folks like us, understand conditions that that lead to crime, or that put people in a court system out of which they then don't know how to get out. You know, there's certain skills for surviving in an incarceration situation that are not skills on the outside. So that's my other concern is, what are we doing for those people who are not there for life, right? And we plan to allow them out, but everything that's happened to them in incarceration prepares them for the opposite of what it takes to come out and live well. And so we need to do better in that regard. Just being turned into a number, being turned into a thing, being prepared for violence around you, rather than to hear a sound and be able to detect that's not violence. Those are things that lead to people being more prepared to lead violent lives when they get out, rather than and so we've got to do something about that.
Yeah, and to one final point, when you talk about the called the school to prison, pipeline. I spent a lot of time at the high schools working, with kids, and I remember there was a time when I was growing up. You got into a fight at school. It was handled with the principal and, detention, after school, or Saturday school is what we called it, as well as a remedy for that. Now with the presence of school resource officers and law enforcement on campuses now, and I speak to this because I've had to be involved with it 3 times in the last 4 years. A kid gets in a fight at a school, he or she gets an automatic citation from a law enforcement officer, and they've got to show up to juvenile court. And so at that very moment, they are in the criminal justice system. Like at that very moment, what used to, be handled because, kids are going to be kids, now has become a situation in which now you have to come to juvenile court with your parent or guardian, and whatever those repercussions are, and that exposes a kid to something. I just don't think, for something at that level, he or she needs to be exposed to, and there are different ways to address, kids' conflict resolution, essentially, instead of bringing in local law enforcement to deal with that and what can happen after that. So those are those are kind of things that frustrate me, and I ask myself, how did we get here to arresting I've seen in some cases 10-year-olds, and why are we here, and what do we think this is going to solve? So
I agree.
Final thoughts that you would like to share with everyone.
Well, if we ask what kinds of things can make a difference, I would just really encourage folks to find ways that they can learn about the life of folks on death row and in incarceration. To, in that sense, break the gap between those of us who we think are safely out here and those that we think are so terrible because they're in there. And sign up for programs where you get to meet people who have been prisoners, read books about people who have been prisoners. A book that made a big difference for me when I was working on my dissertation on death penalty was called In the Belly of the Beast, Letter from Prisons. And it was written, they were letters written by somebody in prison, Jack Abbott, I believe was his name, and just his description of prison life. And then you get to the end, he is one of those people, he did get out, and he's holding a job and he hears a sound in an alleyway that was nothing, but he responded to it as if it was the kind of violent threat that he had experienced in jail. And he responded to that, and it ended up him getting killed. And so I think that's important, that we understand folks' lives and to think of them as persons, and asking, what can we do to help them respond in deep ways that recognize the depth of the wrong when it's wrong, and how they might become better people while they're incarcerated and when they get out. The book Just Mercy, I don't know if that was going to be a different question, but you asked me about some books. And of course, I think Brian Stevenson's book, Just Mercy.
Right.
I think everybody should read it. And the movie's good, but don't just depend upon the movie. Read that book and get an inside view of what happens when somebody gets falsely accused. And also you see the broader, even a broader picture than that about how the death penalty functions and the kind of cases and folks who usually get brought up against the death penalty. I think in that book, Stevenson says that while you can trace a thing of race, making it more likely that somebody's going to end up on the death row, either their race as the accused or their victim, because if your victim is white, there's a likelier chance that you're going to get the death penalty. But then he says, but to a person, the folks he's worked with on death row have been poor. Right? And our ability to see, to in a way, to criminalize poverty and to see those who are poor, we move from they're poor, they're non-contributors, therefore they're probably bad folk. Mm-hmm. So I would trace our ability to change our prison systems and treat people more justly, more merciful and good by how we treat folks on the street.
Yeah, that's good. Dr. Corbitt, I appreciate you very much for sharing with us today.
Thank you for asking me, Phil. I really appreciate it.
Hey, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this Humanity Matters show, Humanity Matters One-on-One with Dr. Peg Falls-Corbitt. As always, you can connect with me at philipfletcher.org, philipfletcher.org. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, Humanity Matters. Go over there and subscribe and share and leave a comment. We would greatly appreciate it. If you missed any portion of this show and you just like to listen instead of watch, this will be available, the Humanity Matters podcast this week. So be looking forward to that. And you can find that on wherever you get your podcast content. If you'd like to sponsor the show, connect with us at pfletcher73@gmail.com through PayPal. And we'll be happy to run a ad, logo, whatever you would like as a appreciation for sponsoring this show. And then finally, if you want to participate in the mailbag, Humanity Matters Podcast at gmail.com, Humanity Matters Podcast at gmail.com. So as always, remember to be loved, to be kind, and to be generous. And if we remember to live in hope, we can do the impossible. Y'all take care. God bless. When I say your name, it says you exist and that you matter. I can't transform what I don't think exists. I won't transform the person I don't think that